Greetings and welcome to our daily walk through the scripture for May the 23rd. Your readings for today find you in 2 Samuel chapter 4, 5, and 6, John chapter 13, verses 31 through 38, and the first 14 verses of John 14. And then you have the next section of Psalm 119 and Proverbs chapter 15, verses 31 through 32. Now, before we get into John, just a fun little history note as we look at 2 Samuel. You see David starting to establish his reign. It talks about him reigning for 40 years, for 7 years in Judah, okay, and then for 33 years over Israel and Judah, okay, so that's when he's united. But there's a fun little note here when it says David conquers Jerusalem. I think a lot of times we think that Jerusalem has just always been Israel's. And it hasn't. As a matter of fact, Jerusalem had been, up to this point, defeated several times. It was always held by other people, but Jerusalem was considered a mighty fortress. It was considered one that was very difficult, which explains a lot of what you see later in the Old Testament when we get towards the exile of Israel, and we see that Jerusalem gets laid siege many times, and yet it's very difficult to get into the city. Well, David manages to do that, and finally it becomes what he calls the city of David, the city of Zion. And this happens, you got to keep in mind, this happened 3,000 years ago, okay? So Jerusalem has been in the country of Israel at some form or fashion for almost 3,000 years. Now, obviously, there was a time when Israel ceased to be a country, and yet Jerusalem still always contained a population of the Jews. So there's your history part for it. In John chapter 13, we see some pretty significant statements that happen, and there's just a couple of them that I want to go on to here. Now, first of all, this is happening right after Judas has been it's been revealed that Judas is the betrayer. And it says in verse 31 of John 13, when he was gone, Jesus said, now the Son of Man is glorified, and God is glorified in him. Basically, Jesus is saying, up to this point, things could have been stopped. Things could have been ceased. But with Judas leaving, Jesus is basically saying, now here it is. This is the time. This has come. Nothing is, at this point forward, everything else is going to happen as it has been deemed. Up to this point, things could have been averted, but now it's time, and God will be glorified in this. And this is an important thing that I want all of us to hold on to, is that we have to understand that in every situation, and no matter what happens, ultimately God will be glorified. Now, that doesn't mean that we're always going to glorify God with our actions, that we're always going to be making God look good. But it does mean that ultimately, in the end of the situation, in the end of things, God will be glorified. God will be made to look good, whether it be in our life or lives to come. God will be glorified. Okay, so that is something that we need to do. And then Jesus in verse 34 says, a new command that I give you. Why is Jesus saying a new command? Because this actually isn't a new command. I mean, we get this command all the time in the Old Testament. We look at it and, you will love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. I mean, this is not new. You will love your neighbor as yourself. This is not new. So why is Jesus saying that it is a new command? He's not really saying it's new as in it's something you've never heard before, but what he's doing is he is reiterating. Remember, at times when Jesus has fulfilled the law, this is an example of Jesus making sure that this is a part of it that we carry out. This is a command, not a suggestion. This is Jesus saying, hey, listen, reminder, when everything else is going on here, you are going to be testimony, and your testimony is going to best come about by how you treat one another. This should be a conviction for us Christians. How are we loving one another? Now remember, love looks like different things. Sometimes love is going to be the love that we envision, affirmation of support, but other times love is going to be discipline. Love is going to be situations that are going to be uncomfortable, but ultimately the point of love is to point people back towards God. Everyone will know that you are my disciples, you are my followers, if you love one another towards me. If you love each other in the direction that you are pointing people towards me. This is why Peter says that let no unwholesome talk come out of your mouth. Be edifying to one another. Edification is a word that requires truth. It requires discernment. It requires love. Edification, the point of edification is love. It is to turn people back to God. We do it through truth, but we do it through discernment as well. And that sometimes gets lost, that whole discernment thing. Okay, so that's kind of what we're looking at today. We'll talk more about more tomorrow.